Hey guys, I got a super exciting video for you today. And because this channel has a lot of videos where I give you advice on interviewing, or basically trying to teach you how to pass an interview, you all may be wondering, well, how good of an interviewer am I? Like, would I be able to pass an interview? And so this video is super special because I get interviewed by one of my fellow coaches, and you get to see if I can actually pass an interview. This video was recorded in partnership with Albert's Listings and Job Referrals here in the San Francisco Bay Area. They are a phenomenal Facebook group and community where they've got almost 45,000 members at the time of me recording this. And if you are looking to get a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, or you live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, you need to join this group. There's always postings about new jobs and opportunities, and you can even just pose questions and try and get advice, and the community is there to help you. So please join my friend Albert's Facebook group as part of his growing community, and maybe you'll find your next great job there. All right, and if you like these types of videos and you want to get more content and career advice, make sure you drop a like and subscribe below. But let's dive into this recording and see how I do.
All right. Good evening, Albert's List, and welcome. We hope you're having a great week so far with even everything that's going on with COVID and the re-lockdowns that we're experiencing today. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe. This is just getting to a point of craziness, getting to a point of scariness, and at least one thing I can depend on is a video every week with Corey to talk about mock interviews. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing. It's Monday, and so we have Corey back to do a mock interview. And in this case, we're going to be mock interviewing him. He's been with us since the end of March, and he's been helping everyone from marketing to engineering professionals. Today, we're going to be doing another interview, and like I said, we've turned the tables. We're interviewing Corey. And so he's in the hot seat. And so for those of you who may have been interviewed by him and felt like he was unfair, or maybe you felt, or maybe you want to see the master of interviews do what he can do best, this is your opportunity to join us, join the conversation, and get to know how these interviews are really done. And so for those of you who are just tuning in, Corey is a Fortune 5 company recruiter located in Mountain View. I'll let you figure that out for yourself. If you don't have any clue, you can go ahead and Google it. And what we'll do here is I will hand it off to Corey here to introduce himself. And then what I'll do is I'm going to hop into some of these questions, and then both me and you, the audience, can provide your feedback around how you think these questions were answered. And Corey, I think because you actually do this for a living too, you can tell me, because you're likely self-aware yourself, how you felt you answered too. So Corey, we're really excited to have you today. This is the position that we have in front of us. It is a position at PayPal, the company that Elon Musk and several others founded many, many years ago. And we're looking to expand our team. And before we actually hop into this, I just realized, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and actually getting out of the interview format here, just sort of promote yourself and tell people on Albert's List who you are, especially if they haven't seen you before. We have like 200 people a week. So, definitely there's somebody who doesn't know you that's watching you right now. And yeah, tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, Albert's really gave a great intro so far. For those of you who are new, I've been a recent guest on Albert's List. I'm very, very fortunate to be helping out here in the community. Typically Mondays is when we do mock interview sessions, and I've been interviewing folks from all different types of backgrounds. And someone had mentioned, I think last week, like, Corey, why don't we just interview you and see how you like it? So here we are. I thought it would be a cool little fun challenge to see if someone who helps coach others on interviews would be able to pass and do well in an interview. And so I just picked this recruiting position somewhat at random. There's not a whole lot open right now, as I'm sure a lot of fellow recruiters who are looking for work will probably tell you. I myself am not currently looking for an employment, so you don't have to message me or reach out with any potential job offers, although I'm very honored and would definitely appreciate it. I'm not actively on the market right now. I picked this job description because it was pretty descriptive. I realized actually why it was so long later on. They actually copied and pasted the same bullets twice. So I think there's a bit of a typo or like proofreading thing there going on. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because
we just picked.
this is a lot of things to do
Yeah,
here.
well, it's actually the same. I think they copied the bullets twice. I think, if I remember correctly. But anyways, yeah.
That's
So we
kind of
just picked this
funny.
one from PayPal. And if for folks who are wondering like how I prepared for this, I spent about an hour preparing. I didn't have a whole lot of time. But what first thing I did was I tried to predict any questions I may get as it relates to the role. And then I just took notes, bullet points. I didn't write out a script. These are just bullet points of like what I would want to cover in each of my different questions. And then I had some time. I did about 10 minutes worth of, oh, you can't really see this, but I filmed myself practicing each of these different, scenarios or questions. And then I would listen to it, play it back, and then see what I could change, make more efficient or optimized. And then that's kind of how I would recommend anyone essentially prepare for an upcoming interview. So I just tried to be fair and, do exactly what I would expect whoever is going to do an interview to do. So that's pretty much
Wonderful,
been the entire
wonderful.
process. And yeah, this will be a fun little challenge for me. I actually think everyone should interview like at least once a year. Number one, just because interviewing is a skill and the more you use it, the better you'll be over time. And I think the interesting thing too is interviewing people is not the same as actually doing interviews. So if you are like a manager or someone who does interviews at your company, I would highly encourage you to still go out and interview at least once a year, even if you are not looking for a job. That way, when you are looking for a job, the ramp up time and practice isn't so strenuous. And also, it's really good to understand where you kind of sit and your value necessarily in the marketplace, right? I think it's always very helpful to be cognizant of like, are you a hot commodity in the market? Like, would you be able to pass certain interviews? Are you applying online and like no one's getting back to you? Like, that's all good information to have before you actually need to get a job. So just wanted to throw that bit of coaching advice out there as well. And
Sounds
then
good.
Albert's got my resume. We'll probably jump back and forth between the job description and my background. But I am a recruiter during the day, and then I also have some coaching services as well. The top of my resume is all the contact information you need to come and find me. And then I do have YouTube videos for interviewing, resume writing, networking, and all other types of things. So feel free to go ahead and check that out as well.
I'm
And
happy
I
to give you the chance to share your screen at the end so that you can also share with them your YouTube channel. I think it's definitely great that you have that YouTube channel out there. The videos are really good, as well as the cover art for these videos too. You've got some really great emotions on there and everything.
I've been experimenting, I've been experimenting with different ones. This week we're gonna try like no face, and then we'll see how that one performs. But
Yeah.
yeah, happy
Yeah.
to happy to show that as well. I'm just pulling that up right now, so I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Wonderful. All right. So the first question, and I noticed that we have something like 30 people here, so it's actually pretty cool. People do
Welcome
want to
everybody.
see how a interviewing expert performs during the course of his own interview. Corey, welcome to PayPal. We're really excited to have you here. As you know, we're expanding our resources here. We're recruiting more because a lot more people than ever are using Venmo and PayPal to
Mm-hmm.
do their touchless payments, especially in this COVID world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I notice you're at a Fortune 5 company already right now, and that it sounds like you're doing really well. Tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're looking to make that move.
Yeah, so I think the first part of the question I'll answer, like, tell me about myself. This actually, as of this month, this week, in fact, it marks my 3rd year anniversary into full cycle re recruiting. Before my current employer, all of my exposure to recruiting has actually been more on the campus side. So this is my first time doing full
Mhm.
cycle, and it's been a really interesting ride and a blast. In terms of the roles that I've been focusing on during my tenure here, it's mostly been on the G&A side of the house, less tech, mostly within human resources, and then recently I've picked up some technical roles like data analytics and business intelligence. The question I get asked kind of frequently too is what is the level of role or profile that I tend to focus on? And I tend to focus more on the mid-level all the way up to the senior and executive level. The past few quarters, even during COVID, has actually been more on the executive level side, particularly within our cloud business, which, as you know as
Mm.
well as one of our competitors, is growing pretty rapidly. Um, in
Yeah.
terms of my overall experience, right, this was my first dabble into recruiting, and surprisingly, ever since I started here, I actually had not gone below 150% of my hiring target, and I've actually had an increased hiring target almost every 6 months because they realized I was probably hiring a little bit too much, if that's even
Hmm.
possible. So. Performance-wise has been pretty strong, but I think I'm a little bit unique in that I do have a untraditional recruiting background. I actually came from a management consulting field at PwC. So I like to identify project and process based opportunities to find efficiencies over time. There's a few of those projects that I highlighted in my resume that I'm happy to double click on, but like a time analysis survey, I did a leveling project and things like that. So I try and balance my recruiting work, but also with some project management and overall business impact. In terms of why I'm looking to potentially leave my current employer and join a fantastic company like PayPal. Well, I've actually been a big user, and as a entrepreneur, I am a huge component and have had to use your product specifically for like invoicing, receiving payments, and even selling a few things on eBay as well. I know you guys are no longer part of the same umbrella, but overall, I've actually had a really positive customer experience, and I've always believed that I should actually work for a company that I truly believe in, and I think that's actually what can make you a really effective recruiter as well, right? Because you are essentially an advisor for a lot of these candidates that you're going to be working with, and if you don't believe in the company, the product, the team, the hiring manager, for example, it's really hard to actually convince someone else to take a big risk, right? We're going to be focusing on hiring really strong talent into your organization from companies like your biggest competitors, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks of the world. And so I think it's really important for me to be bought into the mission and the culture, and then I can kind of pass that on to the candidates as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. So getting out of interviewing mode, and I'm actually curious to maybe even ask you while we're in this mode, whether you wanted to just go all the way through for the next 45 minutes as if we were doing like a legit interview and then go down the feedback after that, or if you wanted to do question by question, since we are both job search geeks here.
We should probably do question by question because I won't remember probably what I said for
Yeah.
each question at the end. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and that's also for those of you who are wondering, it's because I don't have a script, right? So like, let's
yeah,
say the audio went out halfway and I had to restart or something. My answer
yeah.
actually would probably be different both times,
Mhm.
because I go based on bullet points. I don't go based on a script.
Okay.
Uh, so that's something interesting that some
So
people
we'll
have their own
go
style.
question by question then. And we already have our first comment for you. Adib says, is it a good strategy to lay out all the cards, explain everything right off the bat? I think the first part of the answer was sufficient. When I'm hiring, there are more pressing questions that I have been seeking that I have when seeking talent and skill. So Adib is one of our very prominent longtime members. He works for a company named after a fruit in the South Bay. Guess if you don't know that, you can also Google that as well.
Hmm.
And so I think my feedback is kind of in line with that because I did ask you to tell me about yourself and why you're looking to work at a
Hmm.
company like PayPal. You answered the question of why you wanted to work at PayPal really well. I think you spent a lot more time, I think, leading into it, and I did notice that you were also anticipating maybe some of the questions that I may ask as well by thinking about our competitors, by thinking about that as well. And so I guess if this is for a more senior talent acquisition type role, the longer answer is permitted. If you were a more entry level individual, maybe about 45 seconds into that question, I'm wondering why you're talking for so long. Now, what is your feedback on yourself here?
Yeah, I timed myself too, and my tell me about yourself answer when I was practicing was about a minute and 10 seconds. A
Okay.
little bit longer than what I normally wanted, but because the job description is generic, I decided to go with like a broad explanation of my role itself.
Okay.
And also, almost everything that I talked about is not actually listed on the resume, and so those were probable questions that I would probably have to answer anyways,
Hmm.
because I don't list the roles that I recruit for. I don't talk about the levels. I don't talk about, campus recruiting experience. And so I kind of wanted to craft that story that way.
Okay.
Ideally, what I would normally do is if it was a really, like, if the job description was more specific, I'd actually like know exactly points that I should talk about, and then I could probably condense it into 45 seconds. But I did go a little bit longer just because I wanted to kind of give that breadth of experience, but I didn't go too long. I know like a minute and a half, 2 minutes would have been way too long, but I was a little over a minute, I think.
And I know you've got the timer there, so I definitely trust you in this exercise here to
Oh, I don't
time
have a
yourself.
timer, but when I was practicing today, it was like a minute and 10 seconds when I was watching my
You got it. Okay. All
recordings.
right.
But yeah, it's a fair point. It's a longer answer.
Okay.
Um, so
Yeah, and I know you have questions here that you've sent me beforehand. I also have questions that I've decided to add in there to throw you a curveball
I love it.
because curveballs are always a part of an interview, you know?
I love it.
So it sounds like you know a little bit about cloud computing. It sounds like you know who some of our competitors are. Hopping back into the moment here and asking these questions. What do you know about the payments industry, and what do you know about where PayPal is positioned and what's at stake for us going forward for the next, say, 12 to 24 months?
Hmm. I would be totally honest, and I am actually not like an expert in the POS space. When I
Mhm.
was at PwC, I spent a slight stint in the finance group, and actually worked on all the other finance processes except for
Yeah,
uh, point to sale. I did a lot of R&R and like month end close and things like that. So in terms of like the overall technology stack and like your overall perspective as a company, like within that space, I am not very familiar with where you are. However, as a user and from whatever information I was able to gather from the 10K and other information and things like that, I think PayPal is actually positioned in a really unique space, especially given how your business has transformed over the last few years. And this is a very interesting time, not just for your company, but for a lot of companies dealing with COVID-19. I think this is actually going to be eye-opening, not just for investors, but also for the talent that we're trying to recruit over time. And that's actually what gets me most excited about coming in and joining PayPal right now, especially in this type of cloud-based service, which is going to be probably the ones that are going to live through and thrive through these times. And I know everything just got shut down again
yeah.
here in California, and so I'm a really firm believer in the product itself. I've used some of your competitors, and luckily you were able to acquire Venmo, which is, I thought, another strong service. And just as a user and customer, I think in terms of like a product skill set and like your strengths and weaknesses, that's kind of where I'm coming from. But in overall like business perspective, I have not done that type of research.
Awesome. Okay, so getting out of that really quick. I think that was a good answer. I think that I generally, personally, when I interview, try to shy away from admitting that I may not know as much as I'd like to know about the company. Instead, going off of what I do know and what I've been able to find off of research, and then being able to then connect my knowledge of that into the recruiting space in saying, so for example, I guess if I was going for this particular role, I'd say that I know that PayPal has a history of, being one of the biggest financial services companies, acquired by eBay, then spun out, now also an owner of Venmo and a leader in the touchless, contactless payment space. And that not having known what actually PayPal is hiring for, I maybe would go off and say something about how security remains an issue, how likely technologies that will allow for more buyer and seller velocity are probably an issue, and those are the type of roles that you would be kind of like hiring for, and that I understand why those roles are important and so forth. Now back over to you. Tell me how you thought about your response.
Yeah, so this one, I just straight up didn't do enough research about the company to like
Sure.
adequately answer the question. And my stance is always like I don't feel comfortable kind of like BSing my way through certain questions. I think it's just a style thing, right? Like,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
and also because I don't have a technical recruiting background, which I kind of highlighted but tried to like glance over in my tell me about myself thing, right? I was very conscious and like not mentioning too much about like the tech stack and
Sure.
like certain technologies and things like that because I have like some exposure to it based on the people that I've hired who like interact or manage with those clients. But
Mhm.
if I brought up something kind of like you did, right? I'm always worried about the follow-up question, which is like, oh, really, Corey? It sounds like you know a lot about touchless payments and like whatever, whatever. Like, tell me more about like that space. And then now I've like dug myself in this hole where it's kind of like, okay, I clearly like made something up on the first part of the question, and then now they're asking me a follow-up question, and then so I was just trying to kind of hedge my bets in terms of
Mm.
like how I want this question to play out later on. Um,
Okay.
if this had happened in like the real interview and I showed up and I wasn't prepared and I didn't do this, I would hope that by ending this question like somewhat abruptly, kind of like how I did, and there's like no follow-up questions they could ask, I would therefore try and recover on these following questions to see like if I'm able to kind of save
Mm.
myself. But that's kind of like how I was approaching it.
This
Because
is in the trenches. I like it a lot.
I was just thinking about like the follow-up questions and like
Yeah.
what they would build on if I were to say something.
Yeah.
But obviously, like coming prepared for like the interview, like based on the company's like profile and market space, would have been helpful as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I can see that too. And so for those of you who are watching, obviously there's I guess, a semi-clash of philosophies. You can go either way, I think. But since Corey is the interviewing expert, I would defer to him for the remainder of this video.
Well,
I
I
have
also think
three.
Albert has great points too. So balance both perspectives.
Yeah, balance both. As with everything when it comes to job hunting, it's a balancing of your perspectives and an understanding that there are multiple right answers. And if you're confident enough to even just go out on a limb and say that you know absolutely nothing about PayPal and still survive the interview, then more power to you, right?
Yeah, that one would probably not end so well. Yeah.
All right. So, just as we're also here, actually, I should also mention, since I neglected to mention this in the first place, we will not be hopping into any technical questions today. So, I will not be grilling Corey on his understanding of talent acquisition tools like a Taleo or any of these other leading technologies that you see on the market today. We're going to stick with a lot of soft skill questions, situational questions, and then even vision questions as we move forward in this hour. So the next question I want to ask you, Corey, and we are very much about people here. After all, this is in the area of HR and recruiting. I'd like to know so far in your career, because you do have a very impressive resume. What do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment so far?
My greatest accomplishment so far. I
Yes.
think, especially now during these times with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think actually even before this though, my greatest accomplishment was probably increasing the overall representation and diversity within the groups that I hire for Black and Latinx talent. I think I looked at it yesterday, it went up about 25 or 26% over the last 2.5 or 3 years since I've been here. To give you some context on like the landscape, before I started at hiring for this role, we used to hire from the same companies over and over again with the same type of backgrounds, and it was kind of like a cookie cutter mold, right? So if you were hiring for a sales account executive, you needed to come from X, Y, and Z companies, and you had to be a sales account executive. There was very little flexibility in terms of looking at other backgrounds that may have transferable skill sets but don't have the literal same job title. And so, in order to kind of help change and influence and increase the overall diversity, not just from a race and gender perspective, but also from a skill set and background, we tried to, with the help of my team, tackle this in essentially two different ways. The first is through sourcing or pipelining, and then the second is through the actual like business partnership and client management itself. So from the sourcing perspective, I worked closely with the sourcers on my team and some of the strategy and ops folks to actually build and show like a talent map, and we were able to highlight both with qualitative and quantitative data the benefits, strengths, and weaknesses of certain markets, right? And if you wanted to hire Black or Latinx talent, you should highly consider looking at markets like Atlanta, right? LA, Texas, even parts of New York and things like that, right? And so with that, we were able to kind of build a business case and eventually actually get approvals at the higher level to expand our location strategy, which not only helps with pipeline and speed to hire, but also from diversity. Now, the second thing that we did, and this was more on the client management side, was actually showing and building business cases for and creating use cases where we're able to demonstrate that you can actually hire someone with a non-traditional background to actually exceed and thrive within the role itself. That also opens up pipeline, yes, but it also creates opportunities for folks of different backgrounds. But also, if you look internally, because as a recruiter, we're not just focused on external talent, but also looking at the overall picture of talent within an organization. It also creates more internal mobility opportunities and allows you to actually talent plan a little bit better from an overall HR strategy perspective.
Oh, that's
And then
awesome.
if you were thinking about like the result of the work, right? I know I mentioned it goes up by 26%, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look beyond just like my specific impact or this organization as a whole, given the current landscape and the market, this is something that a lot of companies are going to be striving for and also having now to probably report on either annually or quarterly over time. And it's going to be increasingly more important. And as I move from team to team or even join PayPal, if I was so lucky, I know that there's a lot of process improvement as well as some of the learnings that I've gone through my own coaching with my clients that I can actually help hopefully influence the diversity mix at PayPal.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so getting out of that, you actually answered, I think, Adib's question here that he asked. He was going with, in your career, how did you lead recruiters to identify the best talent for a given team? What were some of your challenges? So obviously what you did there was you used the STAR method, which is tried and true and very effective. And you were able to tell me a story of what challenges you faced at the beginning, what you did to mitigate those challenges, how you were able to gain buy-in. So that's actually an additional impressive piece because it shows me that you were able to not only execute, but you were able to also lead, which is a really crucial part about being a talent acquisition partner. And then from that, you were able to kind of tell what the results were and then really lay out that impact. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly that. The hard part about this answer, right, is like it's a
yeah,
broad
it is.
topic, and also I was very mindful about how long I wanted my answer to be. I think it comes out to like a little over 3 minutes, at least when I was practicing. I don't know how long it was when I actually had to do it live, which is probably like a little on the shorter side, to be honest. But I know that there's a lot of areas and things that I mentioned that they may want to double click on.
Yeah,
And so giving them the interviewer that flexibility to kind of ask me like, well, how did you influence them to think about other locations, right? Or
yeah.
how did you build a business case that they should hire someone that doesn't have that background that they used to have before? And then I could turn that into like a mini star question as well. But I know that there's areas that I could have double clicked on to make it longer, but that's kind of the balance that I tried to strike.
And I think the other piece for this is to note what your greatest accomplishment actually is. So, for example, you're going for a recruiting role. Let's say you ran like a ultra marathon in your life, which is a 50, I think, a 50-mile run. Would you talk about your ultra marathon run in this case?
I think it would depend on the mix of questions that I've gotten already, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're your fourth interviewer in and it's clearly like you've just only been talking about recruiting at a certain point,
yeah,
then maybe you want to like sprinkle in some of the personality stuff that kind of helps you build your story or your brand that makes you memorable. I can see like that being it. But if this is your first interview, like this is your first question for recruiting or whatever role it is, and you
yeah.
talk about something that's not related to the role, I mean, it's hard to gauge what that reaction would be, but my guess would be probably not too positive. But
Yeah.
I think if you're like 4 interviews deep, it's probably something you would want to consider.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think I think it reminds me of a lot of my very entry level interviews back in the day where I still had my hobbies listed on my resume, which for those of you watching is generally a no-no depending on what industry you're going into. And so I would talk about my hobbies, and of course, it's kind of a waste of time at that point because it's like, who really cares? You're here to like be an assistant to the marketing manager. So it's like, you know, but I think, yeah, I think a couple of interviews in, and even if you're like a senior talent acquisition manager, that may be something definitely to consider. For those of you who are watching, I'd love to hear your opinions on that too. When you're asked about your greatest accomplishment, how do you answer so far right now? All right, so going back into additional questions, let's hop deeper into your recruiting philosophy. Tell me about a time when you got a position that was both really difficult and maybe something that you weren't familiar with, and you had a tough hiring manager. How do you get up to speed in those kinds of situations?
So, wow, those are three difficult situations all put together.
We're here all about complexity at
I
PayPal, so
don't necessarily have one that I can think of right now that hits all three. I've got one that can hit two of three, or would you like me to kind of walk through this as a hypothetical situation instead?
A perfect hypothetical situation is okay. We're not only looking for experienced recruiters, but we also want you to be able to be somebody who can think through your problems.
Sure. Okay. So the three things were difficult hiring manager, new job, and the third one was,
How you were able to get up to speed in that case too. So,
oh, get up to speed. Okay. Okay.
I don't know what kind of tech stack you've been able to hire for in the past, but
I have not.
let's say you were experienced in Node, and we wanted some in Node.js, and we wanted somebody in I guess some other JavaScript language, or
Mhm.
we were looking to hire somebody who had a good Mac OS background, but you were somebody who was very well versed in the Windows tech stack or the Linux tech stack. How
Got it.
would you get yourself up to speed, and how would you get yourself knowing that when you talk to technical people, knowing how choosy they are and knowing how anal they are about being in front of a recruiter who knows what they are talking about, how would you get yourself to sounding like an expert at the most expert level possible?
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Okay. So if we're thinking about this hypothetical situation, how I would approach it, it's probably going to be, I would say, three steps, or I guess focus areas. The first would be my research. The second would probably be the actual relationship or cadence that I would build with this difficult hiring manager, which we'll get into in a bit. And then the third thing would be I always look for optimization or like process improvement opportunities as well. And that I can couple that back to how I like to build relationships with my clients. So circling back to research, right? This is, I think, for me, the most important part when I do get a new type of requisition or role that I've never worked on before, and I kind of need to get up to speed. To your point, whether it's a tech or non-tech role, trying to understand the lay of the land. There's all the basic stuff, right? Like talk to a recruiter that's done it before, looking at LinkedIn, like looking at people who have been hired for this role in the past. But I also like to look at the actual manager's team and the sister teams as well to look both for industry and market insights as well as profiles, because you can actually learn very, very quickly right away based on where they came from or their previous job descriptions, like if this manager is open to a flexible background or is more of that cookie cutter type mold. And then as a part of my research too, I think I like to go a little bit above and beyond by looking more at the HR metrics and using that as well to kind of drive a discussion. And when I'm talking about HR metrics, it's stuff you can get pretty easily from like your Workday or HRIS tool, right? Like the mix of internal and external talent on that person's team. I also like to look at retention and attrition, and even more if possible. I know that sometimes the data is tricky, but diversity and inclusion as well. And then I like to come prepared with all of these different things, market insights, etc., and then actually come with a preliminary list of the different candidates that I would try and present to my initial hiring manager in that meeting. So now we fast forward to the actual meetings or multiple meetings with this difficult hiring manager, right? In the beginning, I hopefully would be able to try and make a good impression. I like to do that by coming prepared, asking some of the questions, but also showing that I'm not just a recruiter, but a talent partner. And that's where that research comes into play, where I can talk about the market insights and provide recommendations and things like that. But there's also two areas that I like to make sure that I not challenge, but push my hiring managers on at the beginning. And the first thing is leveling, making sure that they have a good grasp of the internal mix on their existing team and what the appropriate hiring bar should be. And then also thinking about that diversity and inclusion, right? Now, let's just say through those conversations, I come to learn that it's not an easy working relationship with this person, and they are quote unquote difficult to work with. Then comes the question, well, how do you essentially like build trust or create credibility with this type of person? Assuming this is someone in an engineering role, most likely that's going to be driven through quantitative data and measurement, right? So if it's potentially a question about like, Corey, my role's been open for too long and I feel like you aren't delivering what is needed, or something along those lines, then I like to come prepared with, hopefully, number one, I'm doing my job. So I'm assuming that I'm actually doing my job and there's probably an interpretation issue. Then I would come prepared with some hardcore data, like the amount of people that I've sourced and talked to, my pass-through rates, interview scores, metrics, et cetera, and try and drive that conversation that way.
So this is a are you done?
Oh no, yeah, I can pause here.
Yeah, so taking a pause, I realize I asked a very complicated question, so that might be a interviewing gaffe on my end. Because
there's technically 3 questions in your question, so this one's going to be really long to answer thoroughly.
Yeah,
at least.
I tried to lump, I think, 3 questions into one question. I think sometimes this is an okay thing to do because they do sort of lead into one another. I'm asking you to tell me about a time you dealt with a tough hiring manager, perhaps on a role that you're not familiar with, and asking how you learn all at the same time. And so if I'm a super, super good listener, I've heard answers to all 3 of those. If I'm a recruiter that's just, if I'm a hiring manager or an interviewer that's simply looking to use up our whole entire hour together, this is also a great question too, because you're going to go on for 10 minutes and be like, that sounds good, Corey. You sound like you know what you're talking about. Maybe I'll push you to the next person. And so, yeah, you did a good job because it is a complex question. It reminds me of some of the more complicated questions I've got in my life too, where you're posed some kind of situation, and then all of a sudden you need to tell an entire story. And while you're telling that story, you need to think about what your strategy is, what you're doing, all the tactics around that, and literally planning as you go. And that in itself is talent on its own, because it requires a lot of on your feet thinking, which, for those who are watching right now on screen, it's a good part of your job search and job hunt strategy, because if you got to like sit down and think about how you want to think your way through these things, this is actually a great way to do it too. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by the question because it was like 3 questions rolled into one. And then so my initial thought was like, I guess it's going to be 3 times as long as an answer. I was trying to like gauge my timing on this one too. I know that I was going really long, and actually I wasn't even going to move on at that point when you also kind of were like jumping into, because I knew that I was going long. So normally what I would have done is right when Albert actually was asking me, was I was actually going to pause and be like, okay, I think I answered this, and this question, and like repeat it back to the interviewer, and then just see if they want me to like go backwards. I know that I went really short on the how would you build or like work with a difficult hiring manager. I went really short on that one, but I went longer on the first 2 questions.
Yep.
So I was trying to like find a way to pause myself essentially and see if they want me to go backwards. That was one.
This is the real meat of all these interviews anyhow, because they want to know as much as they can about you in as short a time as possible. And sometimes chaos comes with it. And sometimes in itself is the opportunity to see, can Corey handle the chaos of recruiting? Is he doing what he's legitimately doing at a Fortune 5? And can I throw him 10 questions at once and see how he responds? And, you stepped up to the occasion, but maybe you don't step up to the occasion. And then what happens there,
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be hard, right? Because if
Yeah,
you like, you'll never know where in this question you didn't answer well because there was
yeah,
so many layers to it, right?
yeah,
Like that's the other part too. Like some questions, like if it was just one of those questions, right? Tell me about a time when you were working with a difficult hiring manager and how you overcame it.
yeah.
You could tell right away, oh, I bombed that or I didn't do well. But if it's three parts, like you gotta like, oh, I don't know. I think my first part was good, and then my second part maybe was the bad part, or maybe my third part was the part that they didn't really like. It's hard to kind of gauge and give yourself
Your
feedback.
mind will feel really taxed after one of those interviews, just like you took a really like difficult midterm where you walk out where you're really not sure whether you did well or not, and then maybe a week later, you got like a B plus on it, and you're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I think too, like as I was going through this scenario,
Yeah.
if you do get a question with multiple layers like this one, having that structure that I presented up front was really helpful for me because it allowed me to kind of keep track of what I said and didn't say already. So
Hmm.
because I laid it out, right, research, the actual meetings with the hiring manager, and then like trying to find areas for improvement and optimization, because I was going in that order, I also could just focus on that in the moment, and it was easy for me to remember like, oh, did I say that already? Oh no, that was part of research, so I obviously must have said that already. So it was easier for my brain to kind of like keep adding things on as I've gone along. But it would have been also really hard if you don't have a structure, if the interviewer makes you pause and go backwards to explain something. If you don't have a
Yeah,
structure, you may be like, oh my God, I said that. I don't even remember. And then you're going to have to like fight two battles at the same time.
definitely, definitely. All right, are you ready for the next question?
Let's do it.
All right. So, as you might have noticed, you're applying for a senior talent acquisition partner role. Um, Tell me a little bit about your leadership qualities. Have you led people in the past? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So, if I was to describe my leadership style, it would be trusting.
Hmm.
I've learned that I like to be a very hands-off manager or leader. I haven't had formal management responsibilities while at Google. I'm relatively new to the recruiting space, but when I was leaving PwC as a senior associate, I was actually up for manager, and so I had to directly manage a small team of about three folks before I left. So all of my formal management experience has been with PricewaterhouseCoopers before. Um, I think my greatest joy as a manager, and probably something that it makes things a little bit stressful, is really investing in my team overall and trying to make sure that they're, if not as successful, but more importantly, more successful than me as a leader or coach. And that to me, I think is what defines like or it separates like an average from a great manager, and that's what I think I would be able to strive for and to do. If you're looking for examples, I'm happy to kind of walk you through one either from my coaching business or through PwC.
Yeah, let's make this a double. So tell me about a time when you where you successfully led a team through a project, and tell me also about a time. I know you like our complex questions. Tell me about a time when you led your team through something that was not a success, and what you learned from that, and how you applied it to your next experience.
Okay. We'll do the led my team through a success part first, and then we'll do the one where it was not a success. So, in terms of the one for a success, which one do I want to pick? I think I'm gonna balance my recruiting experience here with something that's not recruiting related. So for this first one, I'll do recruiting, if that's all right. So this is actually a very recent project where I've essentially identified an opportunity to improve something within my organization. Specifically, this says to come with leveling and how we're essentially evaluating what level we should be hiring, but also bringing in talent into my specific org. And this has been about 3 years or so. I've noticed certain trends over time that I feel like have been overlooked and not discussed. And what I ultimately ended up doing was raising this issue up to some of the leaders that I built very strong relationships with. And we ultimately decided that, in fact, my hypothesis was correct. We probably should reevaluate how Google defines level for my particular organization. And so what I had done was created basically a revised scorecard for both interviewing, but also assessing level internally once you're within the organization as well, because not everyone just stays within their specific team or manager, and they like to essentially move around. So the team that I was working with was myself within talent acquisition, but also HR business partners, as well as strategy and operations. Google's a highly matrixed organization, so at no given point is anyone the quote unquote like leader, because I have a certain domain expertise in which plays to my strengths, and then I have to rely on the resources of others. But I was the overall project manager. The end result of this ultimately was that we presented our revised structure to the, well, we have two, like I guess you would call them senior vice president equivalents, one for our cloud business and one for everything else. And so we had to get both sign off from both of those leaders overall. So to me, that would be like the success. We still have to ultimately roll it out. I'm building the training for that as well. So that would be like the first level of success for that role. But I also would quantify it as success because I've essentially built this new process now that I can carry with me to other different organizations, not just impacting the one of my own, because I like to think about scalability as well.
Mhm.
Does that answer the first question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it
Okay,
does.
cool.
It sounds like, though, if I heard you correctly, that you stood up a successful recruiting program as a leader. Did I hear you correctly there?
A recruiting program. No, this is more like I would say talent management.
Talent
It
management.
does
Okay.
affect like different parts of the organization, like
Okay.
recruiting, but also other teams.
Perfect.
And then for the example that was not a success, let's see here. Well, in my consulting experience prior to Google, there was one project that I did with my teammates, where we were working on a overall, I would say like strategy revamp of the customer and go-to-market sales function for a particular client. And we were about halfway through the project, like 4 weeks in, and we had ultimately decided to do the wrong type of customer research and feedback. And it wasn't actually giving us the insights that we needed to ultimately make recommendations and create change for the business. And this was essentially identified by one of our senior stakeholders and SVP of sales when we made a presentation in front of the entire executive leadership board. And he asked us some follow-up questions that we actually didn't have answers to. Um, and so I was on this team, and then I was managing a intern and a relatively recent hire. And so, of course, as the manager, I was the one that was reprimanded in terms of the strategy and approach that I had tried to take. We ultimately recovered and were able to essentially redo some of the customer survey and analysis, and then provide really great recommendations that the chief revenue officer ultimately liked. I think the end result was like a slight increase in sales over like a 5-year period, like about 10 to 15%, after our findings and things like that. Now, in terms of what I learned from this failure, there's actually two things, right? And I actually leveraged the learnings when I built my own survey for Google, or my current employer, I should say, later on. Number one is understanding your target audience and knowing that there's layers and complexities. Not everyone is in the same particular situation. When I designed the survey with my team, I had interviewed like one or two people and asked them about their backgrounds and experience, and I thought it applied to everyone. And as a result, it does not. So that's something that I needed to keep in mind the next time that I redid this project. And I ultimately did do that when I was working at Google.
Awesome. So we'll get out of our moment here. So that was definitely both good responses. Star method was used, and so I that's kind of where my expertise on this ends, because I've been asked, do you have people management experience? I obviously have never had. I've never had any people management experience, with the exception of managing moderators on Albert's list. When it comes to answering this question, what are the best practices, and what do you do to ace this question, especially the question around leadership failure?
Yeah, so this one, I think there's two buckets, right? The first one is, have you actually managed a team? If so, this should be relatively easy for you to address, as long as you
Mhm.
can talk about your learnings. The other bucket, which is where Albert kind of falls, is if you've never managed a team, how do you answer a question about leadership? And then the first part is like, well, you have to understand, what does leadership mean for PayPal or for whatever the company is that you're applying for? Um, like if I were to redo this, if I were to redo my answer, I would want to have a better understanding of the leadership principles for PayPal itself, and then I could tailor my answers better that way to make it like even stronger. So that's the first piece you need, and then second is understanding that being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that people report to you or that you manage someone, right? Being a leader sometimes is just like identifying an opportunity, stepping up, and owning a project. And so maybe if that's the definition for a company like PayPal, then there you go. You have your example in which you can use from. And then, whenever you're asked about any type of failure question, you basically need to think about like, what can I mention that is a real failure that doesn't necessarily eliminate me from the job itself,
Mhm.
and also like, what is my learnings going to be from it? And then you need to essentially show them that you learned from it. And so that's why I picked that example. I mean, it wasn't like a one-to-one connection, but at least I could show that, look, I did learn from it, and I can tell you that I learned from it because I built a new survey at a different company that ultimately went a lot better, right? So I was just trying to find something where I have like a concrete, tangible example.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that stuff's important. And like the thing between leadership that I think of is, so you and I both went to Santa Clara University. We both took Business 71 and 72, which were our leadership courses. I think you graduated from the Levy School of Business, right? Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and so one of the things that is really interesting about the world of leadership is how it's taught is one thing, and how it happens is completely another thing. You can read all the books that you want, but it may never prepare you for what actually goes on in the office. Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. And actually, depending on like what your own experiences have been, but some people may have even realized that there are folks on their team who are not their managers, but actually come across or feel
Mhm.
more like their managers, even
Yeah.
without that formal job title. So, yeah, there's definitely a difference between practicality and just reading it.
And I think the other piece is more not even like direct managerial leadership. So, for example, at my current job as a content strategist, I work across a lot of different teams. I sit in meetings for teams that are not my own team, and I lead by way of knowledge, whether it's how to write a blog, how to distribute a blog, how to think about how to write your piece of sales collateral that sales will ultimately get. And so, is there a way where you could leverage that as a translatable leadership skill from what you've done with cross-functional colleagues towards leadership qualities that could qualify you to become a people manager?
Ooh, that's a totally different level of question. Like if I were to boil that one down, right? It's like
Yeah,
if I've never managed a team before and I now want to manage a team, how would I convince somebody that I would be a great manager?
yeah.
That one is a tough question to answer. It's a big mountain to essentially climb.
Maybe you can put me in the hot seat with that question next week, huh?
I should. Even for myself, right? I think it's
Yeah.
it's context dependent, and also it's just like it's not a slam dunk, right? You're essentially hoping that someone sees enough leadership qualities in you to kind of take a chance and like give
Yeah.
you an opportunity to manage probably a small team to begin with. Um, so in Albert's direct question, right? Like is being a project manager or working cross-functionally enough, in my opinion, to qualify you as a manager?
Mhm.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But if you can show me that you project manage like large projects or things at huge scale consistently over time, and how you've had to coach, mentor, or advise folks in terms of not just like what they do from their job perspective, but like from a career perspective, that I think would be able to build a pretty compelling business case, right? Because if you think about the responsibilities of a manager, it's twofold, right? Like teaching you how to do your job with your actual technical skills, but also like investing in you and growing you as an employee, as a person. And so if you can hit both of those, I think it would be a compelling argument.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a hard transition to make. So maybe if I end up doing a mock interview, you can ask me that question if it's that kind of role. Hopefully, we'll have somebody who wants to join us next week, though. And if you do want to join us next week, where Corey will be interviewing you, he's the actual better interview of the two of us. Send
Not
your
true. Albert has some really good points today, and he crafted some good questions.
Send your resume and a job that you want to apply to albert@ajobslist.com. So I have two more questions left for you. I think that will take up the remainder of our time. The first one would be that getting back into this, that, we here at PayPal are always looking for some of the best talent out there. And sometimes we don't always hit the mark. And we also note that when it comes to best practices and what people like to say out there in the open world, that, recruiting does have some challenges and some flaws to it. So I want to ask you, Corey, if you could fix anything about recruiting, what would it be and why?
If I could fix anything about recruiting, what would it be and why?
Did I
So for
stump you?
me, no, I'm trying to pick the appropriate example in the context of PayPal.
Yeah.
So I think right now the thing that I would fix the most, which is true for any large enterprise organization like PayPal, is the ability to give feedback.
Mm.
Now I know that this is a different type of discussion because there's legal and HR implications as to why many companies do not share feedback. However, what I've noticed during my tenure here as a full cycle recruiter is that there are the majority of instances, at least 60% of the time, I think a candidate would benefit from getting feedback
Mhm.
because they're maybe like 1 or 2 inches away from actually getting a role and like being qualified for a position and doing well. But they just needed to know, something about their resume, or it was something about, how they worded an email to a certain hiring manager or something like that. It wasn't anything major. And I think that would open up not only just a great opportunity for more individuals to eventually get a role, but I think also it just creates a fair and even playing ground. Um, Depending on how a lot of your stats and metrics may look, but I think like the rejection rate at my company, in my personal opinion, is a little too high. And this is important from a sourcing perspective, but also again, because it's a hot topic these days, but diversity and inclusion. And you also want to make sure that you create a fair and equitable hiring process, which is something that I think should be important, not just for PayPal, but for any company. And I think this plays a major component in that piece.
All right, so getting out of that, I think that's a good one. I think that your answer is one that a lot of job seekers on Albert's list would also agree with, because I feel like every single week we get a question of somebody asking why they can't get feedback from their recruiter at a company they applied to. And I think that with at least the right systems in place, we could certainly make that vision possible. What are your thoughts on your answer?
Um, yeah, I'm kind of wishy-washy on my answer. I didn't obviously predict that this type of question would occur because
Does this
um,
question get asked in an interview like this at all? Or would it, am I just kind of
I
pulling
mean, it's
stuff
never
out of
happened to
my
me.
ass?
It's never happened to me, but I could totally see how it would occur, probably just to understand. So, like, if you were wondering why I paused at the beginning, what I was trying to essentially do in those like 2 to 3 seconds was guess what Albert was trying to learn by designing the question in that way, right? And that was ultimately guiding how I was going to answer the question. And my
Mhm.
guesstimate.
Ultimately, my vision in asking this question is that this is a leadership role. When you come into this role, you're likely going to be figuring out our whole entire recruiting process. And so maybe you're going to discover something that's flawed, broken, needs fixing, whatever it may be. And so what do you believe that is broken about recruiting today? Every industry has numerous imperfections. And so um, as a soon-to-be leader, how are you going to leverage your thought leadership in influencing those changes that you think need to be changes?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, the way that it was worded, right? I was thinking, like, okay, is this a behavioral question where he wants me to show that I know how to process improve, right? Or like identify
Mm.
opportunities. But then as I thought about it, I was like, no, he worded it in a way where
It's
he
a
wanted
vision
me to,
question.
yeah, like visionary, like I can pick anything and then
Yeah.
change it. So
It's
that's
one
what
of
like,
those, how do you think and can you back up your claim with evidence and impacts to the contrary?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of why I went down that route, and I didn't go with like the tell me. Oh, I'll tell you about a time when I fixed something in recruiting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I attacked it that way. And then I think what was missing from my answer was like, okay, let's just say hypothetically, Corey, you could give feedback, right? How would you ultimately like make that happen, and how would you mitigate that HR and legal risk and compliance?
Mhm.
That part, like, I would probably need to like think a little bit more on. But I think one of my initial proposals would have been something like creating some type of drop down menu that's approved by legal
Yeah.
that you can give some level of feedback, right? It won't be extremely detailed where it would open us up for like suit or slander. But it would be something like, it had to do with either your profile, your resume, or interviewing. We don't give you anything else. It's just like some type of bucket statement.
Hmm.
um, and then you would have to, but at least that way you could like learn and improve, right? If it's a profile thing, then you just know, okay, I clearly am applying for the wrong role, and like that's why I probably shouldn't bother this recruiter every single time a job gets posted. But if it's something else, then it would be like, oh, okay, I clearly needed to, fix my interviewing or my resume. There was something wrong there, and I just need to go like look through that again.
Yep. 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 Cool. Cool. Final question that I'm going to ask, since we're at the top of the hour here, and this is also one that you're not going to anticipate either. So I noticed, Corey, that when we researched you, that not only did you work at this Fortune 5 company that you mentioned, but you also had your own company called CareerShakers.com. And I know that in Silicon Valley, everyone's got their own side hustle these days. And so I noticed that you run your own company. Can you tell me a little bit about what you see in terms of like you being able to balance what no doubt is a growing venture with the work that you'd be doing here at PayPal?
Got it. So if I just am understanding the question correctly, are you asking like how I am able to time manage between both of the different like opportunities, or are you asking me like what I've learned by doing both of the different things at the same time?
Good question back. Yeah, so that would be your ability to time manage and whether you'd be able to balance the content and coaching that you do at careershakers.com with the no doubt high demand of recruiting and HR work that you would be doing for us here at PayPal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've actually been running my side business for about 3 years or so, which is the entire duration in which I've been working at my current employer. And as you can see from the stats and metrics, it has had almost no impact on my overall performance in terms of hiring and business impact. However, I actually do think it couples really nicely together because I am able to not only like flex my coaching muscle, but it also gives me a lot of really great insights, both from a market and industry perspective, and it allows me to expand my knowledge of certain roles outside of what I may normally get to do. Because I do work at a large Fortune 5 company, I am not forced, but essentially kind of siloed into hiring for a specific type of role. And so I know that one of the areas that I want to work on, for example, is hiring for more technical type of positions, right? Like general software engineer, hardware engineer, systems engineer, things like that. And so by like having this other venture, which allows me to get that type of exposure, I can pseudo get that type of training, not in the formal sense within a company, but allows me to essentially broaden my industry and domain expertise so that if I am put on a new requisition that I may not have formally recruited for, I may have been advising clients on that, and that would allow me to ramp up a little bit faster and also provide value right away.
Awesome. All right. So getting out of that really quick, I think that was a really good response. I think that you actually clarifying the question was definitely the money move right there, because it was kind of vague. I think in terms of asking this question, my intention was to know, like, you are an entrepreneur, absolutely, in addition to being a recruiter at a Fortune 500 company. And are you as committed as I think you would be committed? And so what you did was you cited your productivity rate at your Fortune 5 company. And you took a special care to tell me that it has not impacted your performance. And then you went above and beyond and you told me that not only is this side business a good side business, it is a benefit to the work that you'll do for us at PayPal. And so that tells me that you will not be distracted. It tells me that you will show up to work every day, and your goal is not to be on a beach in Thailand in a year and a half with, 500 million YouTube followers, and that I can trust that you'll stay here and I won't be looking for someone soon after. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think yes, I did all of those things. But also I was trying to think about like, okay,
Yeah.
do I need to play the whole like I love my job thing, I'm passionate about my job, like don't worry, like I'm gonna come in every single day. But I was like, well, I actually feel like the story is more compelling if I just use
Yeah.
logic and data instead. And so that's the route I chose to go with. But I feel like you could go either way, right? Like I could have
You
said,
could be roped into a
yeah.
real tough spot in this question where maybe I ask you, so Corey, I see that you run CareerShakers.com. Maybe you make a lot of money on that. Is there any point where maybe you would leave us to go work on that company? Or let's say you didn't run CareerShakers.com and your side hustle was like a fitness channel on YouTube that monetizes, where you sold jewelry out of an Etsy store if you were that kind of person.
Mhm.
How would you reframe the question in that way?
So I think it
Or
would
the
have to
answer,
be,
rather, the answer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's still going to need to come like, well, the good thing is recruiting and sales, it's very numbers and metric oriented, right? So
Yeah.
fortunately, I have the numbers to back up the fact that like I can actually do both and
Mm-hmm.
balance my time. And because I made a career transition or a career change into recruiting, one could infer that like this is something that I love to do. Otherwise, why would I have given up my other job to go and do this, right? So I know
Right.
that I have a very unique scenario, but that's how I would have played my cards.
Yeah.
If that was not the hand that I was dealt, right? Then it's going to have to be okay. Well, first you have to look at your actual numbers and metrics, right? Like, are you
Mm-hmm.
actually hiring the number you're supposed to? Are you just like barely getting there? And then if you're just barely getting there, then you obviously can't use that as a part of your argument. It's going to have to be
Like, say you only
something
hit
else.
90, 95. Let's say you only hit 85% of your quota and you had
Yeah.
a booming Etsy business. Now what do I think of you?
Yeah, like that part's going to be hard, right? Then in
Yeah.
my and then if it was me, then I'd have to think, okay, have I ever hired someone that I was training like for personal fitness, or like
Mm-hmm.
how could you like somehow show them that like it's actually benefiting your main hustle, if
Yeah.
if that's the appropriate word, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that like I would have to think about, right? If I had a fitness business but I wasn't hitting my targets, it's have to be something else, like, oh, the crazy story. I was training this guy for 6 months. Turns out he's literally the perfect fit for my marketing, whatever lead generation position. And we ended up hiring him the fastest, time to fill in the history of PayPal, all because of my side business, which I run, from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., which allows me to get into the office by 7:30, and I usually work until, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool. All right. Wonderful. So now we come to the end, and I want to ask, do you have any questions for me? And I won't be able to answer them, but I just want to hear what questions you want to ask.
Oh, as if like you were an actual person that was working at PayPal?
Yeah.
Do you want me to actually answer, like ask you questions, or should I just tell people like how I would have designed
What
questions?
questions you would want to ask? Yeah. I wouldn't be able to answer them since we are at the top of the hour, but just wanted to stick that final one in there since the question, do you have any more questions, is a standard question that is asked at the end of every interview.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I definitely will have questions to ask. You definitely shouldn't say no, I don't have any questions. Second of all, it would depend on the audience too, right? Like if this was actually my real manager for
Yeah.
the role, then I have a list of like questions that I like to ask to kind of assess if you would be an overall great fit for me. Because like a lot of the data shows that most people leave their jobs mostly due to their managers. It's like 70% of people attrit due to their managers. It's not
Mhm.
compensation or anything like that. So if you were my actual manager, I'd have questions, right? Like, what type of formal or informal management and leadership training have you taken? What is it like your greatest accomplishment as a manager in like the last 2 years? Something to that effect. If you were not my manager and I just have more probably general questions about the role itself, right? Just so I can get a better understanding for the next interview, because then I want to be able to make sure that I'm tailoring my answers and providing the right like projects to pull on, right? So it'd be questions like, well, I've noticed that this role recently opened for X, Y, and Z team. Like, what is the specific skill set or gap that you're trying to fill within this type of position, and then I would like write it down, and then when I do meet the hiring manager, I use that as ammo to kind of like either drive a discussion or know exactly what examples I should be bringing up over time.
Awesome. Awesome. Good stuff. Cool. Let's see. Are there any final questions? There are no final questions from the group that is watching.
That is quite surprising, actually.
Yeah, we had Adib say a couple things. Aiko said something. Yesenia said hello. But yeah, does anyone from the group have it? Does anyone from the chat have any questions? We're happy to answer them. In the meantime,
I forgot to hit record.
Oh, this video will be still available in the group afterwards, so don't worry about that.
I forgot to hit record on my end, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and download that version of it. Dang it.
But what I'm gonna do for now is I'm actually gonna hand over my screen sharing to you, Corey, so that you can do any, you can offer any last words, any promotions, for anything coming up on CareerShakers.com.
Oh, yeah, this is my only little plug. Check out my YouTube channel if you guys want other tips and advice. Hopefully I did well, or you thought I did well on the interviews, and I've got tips on how to also do well in interviews on here. Everything is free, so please like, subscribe, that'd be awesome. And also I am working on doing like a quick resume review session. So it's very similar to what Albert does on Saturdays, I believe. I'm doing my own version of it. There's a coach in SoCal that I'm working with who wanted to get some exposure. And so I love helping out fellow coaches. And so if anyone is in real estate, sales, or healthcare, please let me know if you would like to get your resume reviewed by a professional resume writer. It's not me, it's a different coach. And I'll have details and stuff that I can send you, but you can reach out to me through Facebook or through my email that Albert had up on my resume. So that's my plug. Thanks,
and
guys.
I think those are some legendary YouTube graphics over there. And I think, you know, I just saw that video on Star versus Car, so I got to go watch that later because I'm wondering what the car method is all of a sudden.
Don't worry, you just shouldn't use it. So that's pretty much the whole thing. You shouldn't use it.
All right, well, cool. Well, thank you, Corey, for joining us today. I think you definitely earned this job at PayPal. And for those of you here also, thank you for spending some of your Monday night with us. And so we hope you've been able to learn something and you can apply some of these learnings to your job search. Again, if you're interested yourself in being a part of these mock interviews and have a resume and a job description that you'd like to share, send them out to albert@ajobslist.com. We know that interviewing is really hard right now, and together we can get through this together, and Corey has done a fantastic job over the last 3.5 months. And so I look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, we have a ton of upcoming events focusing here on the summer of hiring, everything from optimizing LinkedIn to getting a job without any prior experience. If you're interested in attending any of these events, they are paid, and you can get 10% off with A-List 10. I'll likely be running another discount code here in the next couple of days, so look out for that. Until then, we'll see you in the group. Keep asking for advice, sharing your success stories, and helping one another out with opportunities. We know that it's a crazy time out there, and we just went down into lockdown again. And so together, we'll get through this together, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.